The wanted poster fluttered against the wooden post outside the general store in Clifton, Arizona. And Nora Daniels felt her heart stop beating when she saw her own face staring back at her in crude ink sketches. The words, $5,000 reward, printed in bold letters beneath features that resembled her enough to make her stomach turn to ice. She had stepped off the stagecoach only 20 minutes earlier, her carpetbag clutched in trembling hands, her carefully penned correspondence with Jacob Morrison tucked safely in her bodice. And now everything she had hoped for in this new life threatened to crumble before it had even begun. The September heat of 1883 pressed down on the small mining town nestled in the Arizona Territory, and dust swirled around her plain gray traveling dress as she ducked her head and hurried toward the address Jacob had provided in his letters. Her blonde hair, pinned carefully beneath a modest bonnet, felt suddenly too conspicuous, too recognizable, and she wished she had thought to dye it brown before fleeing Missouri. The poster did not tell the whole truth, but truth mattered little when men saw that kind of money dangling before their eyes like a golden carrot. She had not killed anyone, despite what the poster claimed. Her stepfather had done that, had shot the bank manager during a robbery gone wrong, and then he had disappeared into the night like smoke, leaving Nora to face the consequences of his crimes. The marshal had found her in the house, had seen her stepfather's gun on the table, and had heard the dying man whisper a woman's name with his last breath. It had not been her name, but the marshal had decided it was close enough, and suddenly Nora found herself facing a noose for a murder she had not committed. She had run. What else could she do? No one would believe a woman over a dying man's testimony, and her stepfather had vanished without a trace. So she had taken what little money she had saved from her work as a seamstress, had answered an advertisement for mail-order brides in a newspaper, and had corresponded with Jacob Morrison, a rancher outside Clifton who sought a wife to help him build a life in the harsh Arizona desert. The house Jacob had described stood at the edge of town, a small but sturdy structure with a covered porch and windows that gleamed clean in the afternoon sun. Nora approached with her heart hammering against her ribs, wondering if she should tell him the truth immediately or wait until he knew her better, until he might believe her innocence. The decision was taken from her hands when the door opened before she could knock, and a man stepped out onto the porch, his dark eyes taking her in with an expression she could not quite read. Jacob Morrison stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working cattle under the relentless Arizona sky. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar, and his jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He looked to be perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22 years, and his hands were calloused and strong when he removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Miss Daniels." His voice was deep and carried the slow drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas before settling in Arizona. "I saw you coming up the road. Welcome to Clifton, Mr. Morrison." Nora tried to keep her voice steady, tried not to glance over her shoulder to see if anyone had noticed her arrival. "Thank you for your hospitality in allowing me to come all this way." "Jacob, please," he smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something warmer, more genuine. "We have been writing to each other for 4 months now. I think we can dispense with formalities." He reached for her carpetbag, his fingers brushing hers, and she felt a jolt of something unexpected, something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the strength and gentleness she sensed in him. "Come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey." The interior of the house was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and curtains that looked like they had been sewn by inexperienced but determined hands. Jacob set her bag down near a rocking chair and gestured toward the kitchen area. "I have coffee on, and I made some biscuits this morning. They are not as good as my mother used to make, but they are edible." Nora wanted to accept his hospitality, wanted to sit and drink coffee and pretend that everything was normal, that she was simply a bride meeting her intended husband for the first time. But the image of that wanted poster burned in her mind, and she knew she could not build a life with this man on a foundation of lies. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." The words came out rushed, desperate. "Before we go any further, before you decide whether you want me to stay, you need to know the truth about why I came here." His expression shifted, became more guarded, but he nodded and pulled out a chair for her at the small kitchen table. "All right, I am listening." She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and told him everything. The words tumbled out in a torrent, about her stepfather's violence, about the robbery, about the dying man and the marshal who had decided she was guilty. She told him about running, about the fear that had dogged her steps across half the country, about the wanted poster she had just seen in town. When she finished, silence filled the small house, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the mantel. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have any proof of your innocence?" "No." The word was barely a whisper. "I have nothing but my word, and I know that is not enough. I understand if you want me to leave, if you want nothing to do with me. I should not have come here, should not have put you in this position. Did you kill that man?" "No." She met his eyes, held his gaze with all the conviction she possessed. "I swear to you I did not." "I have never hurt anyone in my life." He nodded slowly, as if coming to some decision. "Then you are staying, and if anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, felt hope bloom in her chest like a desert flower after rain. "You believe me?" "I do." He reached across the table and covered her hands with one of his own, his palm warm and rough against her skin. "I have been writing to you for months, Nora. I feel like I know your heart, your character. The woman who wrote those letters could not be a murderer. And even if I am wrong, even if I am the biggest fool in Arizona, I am not going to hand you over to hang for something you say you did not do." "But the reward," she protested weakly. $5,000 is a fortune. You could expand your ranch, buy more cattle, hire help." "I do not want blood money." His jaw set in a stubborn line. "And I do not want a life built on betraying someone who came to me for help. You are under my protection now, Nora. You are mine to protect, and I take that responsibility seriously." The words sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of something else entirely, something warm and unfamiliar that settled deep in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how to repay you for this kindness." "You can repay me by staying, by giving us a chance to build the life we talked about in our letters." He squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "But we need to be smart about this. That poster in town means we do not have much time before someone recognizes you. We need to get you out to my ranch, away from prying eyes. You do not live in town." "No, I have a spread about 5 miles outside Clifton, up in the hills where there is better grazing for the cattle. I keep this house in town for when I need to come in for supplies or to conduct business, but most of my time is spent at the ranch." He stood and moved to the window, peering out at the dusty street. "We will wait until after dark, then ride out. In the meantime, you should stay away from the windows, just in case." The hours until nightfall crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jacob made good on his promise of coffee and biscuits, and they sat at the kitchen table talking in low voices about everything and nothing. He told her about his ranch, about the small herd of cattle he had been building up over the past 3 years, about his plans to expand, and maybe start breeding horses as well. She told him about her life in Missouri, carefully skirting around the subject of her stepfather, focusing instead on her work as a seamstress and her love of reading. As darkness finally settled over Clifton, Jacob saddled 2 horses in the small stable behind the house, working quietly and efficiently in the dim light of a shuttered lantern. Nora changed from her traveling dress into the split riding skirt she had packed, grateful for the practical garment even as she blushed at how it revealed the shape of her legs. Jacob helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, and then they were riding through the quiet streets, keeping to the shadows, heading toward the dark shapes of the hills that rose against the star-studded sky. The ranch house was smaller than the one in town, but somehow felt more welcoming, more lived in. A dog barked as they approached, and Jacob called out a greeting that silenced the animal. He helped Nora down from her horse and led her inside while he tended to the animals, lighting lamps that cast a warm glow over rough-hewn furniture, and Navajo rugs scattered across the wooden floor. When Jacob returned, he showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This was meant to be a guest room, but it is yours now for as long as you need it. I sleep in the loft upstairs, so you will have your privacy." Jacob, she hesitated, unsure how to express the gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. "In your letters, you talked about marriage, about building a family. I want you to know that I still want that if you do. After everything I have told you, if you still want me as your wife, I would be honored." His eyes softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I still want that, Nora, but let us take our time, get to know each other beyond letters on a page. When we marry, I want it to be because we have chosen each other fully, with clear eyes and open hearts." She nodded, relief and something else, something warmer and more complicated, flooding through her. "That sounds perfect." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost peaceful. Nora woke each morning to the sound of Jacob moving around the kitchen, making coffee and preparing breakfast. She helped him with the cooking and cleaning, mended his clothes with the skill of her seamstress training, and slowly began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. Jacob taught her to ride properly, not side saddle like a lady in town, but astride like someone who needed to cover ground quickly and efficiently. He showed her how to recognize the signs of water in the dry landscape, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to approach the cattle without spooking them. They talked for hours each evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set in spectacular displays of orange and purple, and Nora found herself falling for the quiet strength of this man who had taken her in without question. He was patient and kind, quick to laugh and slow to anger, and he treated her with a respect she had never experienced from any man before. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that made her heart race and her breath catch. 3 weeks after her arrival, Jacob rode into Clifton to get supplies, and he returned with a grim expression that made Nora's stomach drop. "There are bounty hunters in town," he said without preamble. 2 men asking questions about a blonde woman who might have arrived on the stagecoach last month. The postmaster told them he did not remember anyone fitting that description, but they are not leaving. They are searching house to house. Fear, which had been a constant companion but had begun to fade, came roaring back with a vengeance. "What do? We stay here, stay quiet. They have no reason to come all the way out to my ranch unless someone gives them cause to suspect you are here." He moved to her, taking her hands in his. "I will not let them take you, Nora, I promise you that. I cannot ask you to risk your life for me. You are not asking, I am offering." His thumbs stroked across her knuckles, and his eyes were fierce with an emotion she was beginning to recognize, beginning to understand. "You matter to me, Nora, more than I expected, more than I knew possible in such a short time. I meant what I said when you arrived. You are mine to protect." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palm, seeing the way his eyes darkened at her touch. "I care for you too, Jacob, so much that it frightens me sometimes." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not want to. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle and questioning, and she answered by rising on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and hungry, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Nora," he said her name like a prayer. "I want to marry you, not because of obligation or because of our letters, but because I am falling in love with you. I want you to be my wife in truth, not just in name." "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "Yes, I want that too. I want to be your wife, Jacob. I want to build a life with you here." They rode into Clifton the next morning, both tense and watchful for any sign of the bounty hunters. Jacob knew a circuit preacher who passed through the territory every few weeks, but he said the justice of the peace could marry them just as legally and with less waiting. They found Judge Patterson in his office above the general store, and the older man agreed to perform the ceremony with his clerk and his wife serving as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and practical, nothing like the wedding Nora had dreamed of as a girl, but when Jacob slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and kissed her as his wife, she felt a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. They signed the marriage certificate, and Judge Patterson filed it away in his record books, making their union official in the eyes of the law. As they left the judge's office, Nora caught sight of two hard-faced men standing outside the saloon, their eyes scanning the street with the predatory focus of hunters tracking prey. She pressed closer to Jacob, and he wrapped an arm around her waist, shielding her with his body as they walked toward where their horses were tied. Well. One of the men stepped into their path, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "That is a mighty pretty lady you have got there, friend." "Where did you find her?" "She is my wife." Jacob's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "We just came from the judge. Now if you will excuse us, we have business to attend to." "Your wife, you say?" The second bounty hunter moved closer, his eyes narrowed on Nora's face. "Funny thing is, we are looking for a woman who looks an awful lot like her. Blonde hair, blue eyes, about that height and build. You would not happen to know anything about a woman matching that description, would you?" "I know my wife matches that description, along with probably 100 other women in the territory." Jacob's arm tightened around Nora. "What is your business with her?" "She is wanted for murder back in Missouri. There is a $5,000 reward for her return, dead or alive." The first hunter pulled out a folded wanted poster and held it up. "This looks like your wife to me. What do you say, lady? Are you Nora Daniels?" Nora felt her knees go weak, but Jacob held her steady. "Her name is Nora Morrison now, and she is not going anywhere with you. We have got a legal warrant for her arrest." The second hunter pulled a document from his coat pocket. "You can step aside peacefully, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." A crowd was beginning to gather, drawn by the tension crackling in the air. Nora saw the postmaster, the general store owner, several miners who had stopped to watch. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but Jacob kept her anchored at his side. "That warrant is not worth the paper it is printed on." Judge Patterson's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd as he descended the stairs from his office. "I just performed a marriage ceremony for Mr. Morrison and his wife. She is a resident of the Arizona Territory now, under the protection of territorial law. With all due respect, Judge, this is a murder warrant." The first hunter's jaw clenched in frustration. "We have the authority to take her back to Missouri to face trial. You have any actual evidence that this woman committed the crime she is accused of?" The judge folded his arms across his chest. "Anything beyond this poster? The testimony of a dying man who identified her. A dying man who whispered a name. That is what it says on the warrant." Judge Patterson had clearly read the document. No other witnesses. No physical evidence. Just the word of a man who may or may not have known what he was saying in his final moments. That is not enough for me to turn over a citizen of this territory to bounty hunters looking to collect a reward. "The law is the law," the second hunter protested, but his conviction seemed to be wavering. "And the law requires due process, not mob justice." The judge turned to address the gathered crowd. "How many of you know Jacob Morrison, know him to be an honest, hard-working man?" Several hands went up, accompanied by nods and murmurs of agreement. The general store owner spoke up. "Jacob has been ranching in these parts for 3 years now. Never caused trouble, always pays his debts. If he says his wife is innocent, I am inclined to believe him." "Same here," the postmaster added. "And I remember that woman getting off the stagecoach. She had the look of someone running from something, sure, but she did not look like a killer to me." The first bounty hunter looked around at the unfriendly faces, his hand still hovering near his gun. "We are just trying to do our job." "Then take your job elsewhere." Jacob's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the tense silence. "My wife is not leaving with you. If the law in Missouri wants her, they can send a proper lawman with proper evidence, and we will deal with it through the courts. But you two are not taking her anywhere." For a long moment, Nora thought it would come to violence. She could see the calculation in the bounty hunter's eyes, weighing the reward against the hostility of the crowd, the presence of the judge, the determination in Jacob's stance. Finally, the first hunter spat in the dust and turned away. "This is not over," he said over his shoulder. "We will be back. You do that." Jacob did not move until both men had disappeared into the saloon. Then he turned to the judge and the townspeople who had spoken up. "Thank you. I will not forget this. Just make sure you treat that wife of yours right," the general store owner said with a grin. "And maybe stop by the store before you head back to the ranch. I've got a nice bolt of blue fabric that would make a fine dress for a new bride." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. When they finally arrived home, Nora dismounted on shaking legs and turned to Jacob with tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed. Those men could have shot you, and it would have been my fault." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "But they did not. We are both fine. You are safe." "For how long?" She pulled back to look at him. "They said they would be back. What if they bring more men next time? What if they do not care about the judge or the law? Then we will deal with it when it happens." He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I am not going to live in fear of what might happen, Nora, and I am not going to let you live that way either. We are married now. We have a life to build together, and I will be damned if I let some bounty hunters take that away from us." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and gratitude and growing love into the press of her lips against his. He responded with a hunger that made her dizzy, backing her against the side of the house and kissing her until she could not remember why she had been crying. That night, for the first time, Nora did not sleep in the guest room. She climbed the ladder to the loft where Jacob slept and stood beside his bed, her heart pounding. He looked up at her in the moonlight streaming through the window, his eyes dark and questioning. "I am your wife," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in every way." He pulled back the blanket in silent invitation, and she slid in beside him, into the warmth of his arms and the safety of his embrace. He made love to her with a gentleness that made her cry again, this time from joy rather than fear, and afterward they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers stroking through her unbound hair. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I love you, Nora Morrison. I love you too." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for believing in me, for protecting me. Thank you for giving me a home." The weeks turned into months, and autumn gave way to the mild Arizona winter. The bounty hunters did not return, though Nora sometimes woke in the night with the fear that they were coming, that they would tear her away from the life she was building with Jacob. He always soothed her back to sleep, his arms strong and steady around her, his voice low and reassuring in her ear. They worked the ranch together, branding calves in the spring, moving the herd to higher pastures as the weather warmed. Jacob taught Nora to shoot, insisting that she needed to know how to protect herself if he was not around, and she proved to be a surprisingly good shot. She taught him the finer points of cooking beyond basic trail fare, and his biscuits improved considerably under her tutelage. On a warm evening in late April of 1884, nearly 8 months after Nora had first arrived in Clifton, they sat on the porch watching the sunset when she placed his hand on her still flat stomach and told him he was going to be a father. The look of wonder and joy on his face was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "A baby," he breathed, his hand splayed protectively over her belly. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." She covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed and pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "I am over the moon, Nora. We are going to have a baby, our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Jacob became almost comically protective, insisting that she not lift anything heavy, not ride too far from the house, not work herself too hard. Nora found it equal parts endearing and frustrating, but she loved him too much to truly be annoyed by his concern. In early October, she rode into Clifton with Jacob to see the doctor and stock up on supplies before the baby came. They were loading packages into the wagon when a familiar figure stepped out of the general store, and Nora felt her blood run cold. Her stepfather had aged in the year since she had last seen him, his face more lined, his hair grayer, but she would have recognized him anywhere. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and his eyes widened in shock before narrowing with calculation. "Nora." He moved toward her, and Jacob immediately stepped between them. "Well, well, I have been looking for you, girl. Stay away from her." Jacob's hand went to the gun at his hip. "Whatever business you have with my wife, she does not want any part of it." "Your wife?" Her stepfather laughed, a harsh sound that made Nora's skin crawl. "She is a wanted murderer. Or did she not tell you that?" "She told me everything, including how you are the one who actually pulled the trigger." Jacob's voice was steady, but Nora could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You let her take the blame for your crime, and you ran like the coward you are. You cannot prove that." "No, but you can." Judge Patterson had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his expression stern. "I heard what you just said about looking for her, about your business with her, and I remember the description on that wanted poster." The dying man whispered a name that sounded like Nora, but it could just as easily have been Norman or Norton. "That is your given name, is it not?" "Norman Daniels." Nora's stepfather went pale. "You have no right to. I have every right to question a man who shows up in my town the day after we get a telegraph from Missouri saying they are looking for new leads in a murder case, because they have doubts about the original suspect." The judge nodded to 2 men standing near the saloon, and Nora realized they were deputy marshals. "These gentlemen have some questions for you, Mr. Daniels. I suggest you cooperate fully." Everything happened quickly after that. Norman Daniels tried to run, but the deputies caught him before he made it 10 feet. They found the murder weapon in his saddlebag, still stained with blood, along with money from the bank robbery. Under questioning, he confessed to the murder, claiming it was self-defense, but his story fell apart when witnesses came forward saying he had bragged about the robbery in a saloon in New Mexico. 2 weeks later, Nora received a letter from the Missouri authorities officially clearing her of all charges and apologizing for the wrongful accusation. The wanted poster was rescinded, the reward canceled, and Nora Morrison was finally, truly free. She went into labor on a cold December night, 2 weeks before Christmas. Jacob rode for the doctor while a neighbor woman who had experience with births stayed with Nora, coaching her through the contractions and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon, but when Nora finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Nora's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Jacob, who had been pacing outside for hours, burst into the room at the sound of the baby's cry. He knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger. "You are both perfect." They named him James Norman Morrison, honoring both Jacob's father and, in a strange way, acknowledging the man whose crimes had led Nora to Arizona and to the love of her life. Jamie, as they called him, had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was the center of their world. The years that followed were full of joy and hard work in equal measure. The ranch prospered as Jacob's reputation for quality cattle grew, and they were able to hire a few hands to help with the heavier work. Nora became known throughout the territory for her skill with a needle, and she took on sewing projects for the townspeople, creating beautiful dresses and shirts that commanded premium prices. Jamie was 3 when his sister arrived, a tiny girl with blonde curls who they named Julia Marie. 2 years after that came another boy, Joseph. And then finally, when Nora was 30 and beginning to think their family was complete, twin girls arrived, surprising everyone including the doctor. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Jacob built on additional rooms with the help of neighbors and friends. The original small structure was now the heart of a sprawling home filled with laughter and love, with children's toys scattered across the floor, and the smell of fresh bread always in the air. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Nora to Tucson for a week, leaving the children in the capable hands of Nora's friend from town and her grown daughters. It was the first time they had been alone together since Jamie's birth, and they savored every moment, acting like newlyweds as they explored the city and spent long nights in a hotel room with no children to interrupt them. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sun set over the desert. "Coming to Arizona, marrying a stranger, building a life so different from what you knew." Nora turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who had given her love and safety and a family beyond her wildest dreams. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You protected me when I had nowhere else to turn, and you loved me when I did not believe I deserved to be loved. How could I possibly regret that?" He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of their first kiss a decade earlier. "I am the one who should be grateful. You made my house a home. You gave me children and love and purpose. I was just a lonely rancher before you arrived. Now I have everything a man could want." They returned to the ranch to find that Jamie had broken his arm falling out of a tree. Julia had learned to braid her sister's hair, and Joseph had decided he wanted to be a cowboy like his father. The twins, now 5 years old, had started a small vegetable garden and were bursting with pride at the tiny shoots emerging from the soil. Life continued its steady rhythm through the years. Jamie grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Julia inherited her mother's skill with a needle and her father's head for business, and she talked about opening a dress shop in Tucson someday. Joseph did indeed become a cowboy, working alongside Jacob and eventually taking over more and more of the ranch responsibilities as his father aged. The twins, inseparable as always, both fell in love with the same boy and had to navigate that complicated situation with their mother's patient guidance. Nora's hair turned silver, and Jacob's back developed an ache that never quite went away. But they still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset over the desert they had made their home. Sometimes their children joined them, sometimes their grandchildren, but often it was just the two of them, holding hands and remembering the day a frightened young woman had stepped off a stagecoach and into the arms of the man who would become her everything. On a warm spring evening in 1913, 30 years after Nora had first arrived in Clifton, they celebrated their anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch had grown to encompass thousands of acres, and the Morrison name was respected throughout Arizona. But for Nora and Jacob, the greatest treasure was not the land or the cattle, or even the beautiful family they had created together. It was the love they had built from letters and faith, from protection and trust, from two hearts that had found each other against all odds. Jamie stood to make a toast, now a man of 46 with children and grandchildren of his own. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what it means to love completely, to protect fiercely, and to build a life worth living. Everything we have, everything we are, we owe to your example." Jacob pulled Nora close, his arm around her waist just as it had been on that first terrifying day when bounty hunters had confronted them in the street. "To my wife," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "The mail-order bride who came to me with a price on her head and ended up being priceless. You are still mine to protect, Nora Morrison, and I am still yours to love." She kissed him there in front of their entire family, not caring about propriety or decorum, and the room erupted in cheers and laughter. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, they sat on the porch in their familiar chairs, looking up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch. "You remember being afraid?" Nora asked quietly. "When we first met, when you learned the truth about why I had come to Arizona. I remember thinking I would do anything to keep you safe." Jacob laced his fingers through hers. "And I remember falling in love with you so fast it took my breath away. I was so afraid I would bring disaster into your life." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Instead, I brought the greatest happiness I have ever known. We brought it to each other." He kissed the top of her head. "And we will keep bringing it to each other for whatever time we have left." They sat in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the Arizona territory, who had built a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The wanted poster that had once threatened to destroy Nora's life was now nothing more than a footnote in their family history, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had overcome. As the years continued to pass, Jacob and Nora remained at the heart of their family, the roots from which all the branches had grown. They watched their great-grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played, taught them the same lessons about hard work and love and loyalty that had guided them through their own lives. Jacob was 73 when his heart finally gave out one afternoon while he was checking on the cattle. Joseph found him sitting against a fence post, a peaceful expression on his face, looking out over the land he had loved so well. Nora thought her heart might break from the grief, but their children surrounded her with love and support, reminding her that Jacob's legacy lived on in every one of them. She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by family, still sewing and telling stories about the early days of the ranch. She told her great-grandchildren about the wanted poster and the bounty hunters, about their great-grandfather's courage and kindness, about the moment he had said those fateful words, "You are mine to protect." On a quiet morning in late summer, Nora passed away in her sleep, a smile on her face and a picture of Jacob clutched in her hand. Her children found letters tucked away in her dresser, the original correspondence between her and Jacob from before she had come to Arizona, carefully preserved for decades. In her will, she left the ranch to be divided equally among all her children and grandchildren, with the stipulation that the original house, now preserved as a museum of sorts for the family, would always remain standing as a reminder of where it all began. They buried her next to Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, Nora Daniels Morrison, 1861–1918. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she came seeking refuge and found love. The ranch continued to thrive for generations after, passing from parents to children, growing and changing with the times but always remaining in the Morrison family. The story of how it all began, of the mail order bride with a price on her head, and the cowboy who had protected her, became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. A century after Nora first stepped off that stagecoach in Clifton, her great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still lived by the values she and Jacob had instilled in their family. The original house stood as a testament to their love, preserved exactly as it had been in those early days, with Nora's sewing basket still in the corner and Jacob's hat hanging by the door. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple over the Arizona desert, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still in love after all those years, still protecting each other, still exactly where they belonged. The wanted poster that had brought them together and nearly torn them apart was framed now, hanging in the family museum alongside their wedding certificate and the letters they had written to each other. It served as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that family is not just about blood, but about the choices we make to protect and cherish those we hold dear. In the small cemetery on the hill, wildflowers grew thick around the Morrison graves, tended lovingly by generations of descendants who knew that their very existence was a testament to a love that had defied the odds. Jacob and Nora Morrison had built more than a ranch in the Arizona territory. They had built a legacy of love, protection, courage, and family that would endure as long as the desert sun rose and set over the land they had claimed as their own. Their story began with fear and desperation, with a woman running from a crime she did not commit, and a man who chose to believe in her innocence. It grew into something beautiful and lasting, a love so strong it created a family that would span generations. And it ended, if such love can ever truly end, with two souls reunited in death as they had been joined in life, forever together, forever protecting each other, forever home. The land remembered them. The house remembered them. And most importantly, the family they had created remembered them, carrying forward the lessons they had learned from two people who had shown them that love was worth fighting for, that family was worth protecting, and that home was wherever your heart found peace. In the end, Nora Daniels Morrison had not been defined by the wanted poster that had once threatened her life. She had been defined by the love she had shared with Jacob, by the family they had built together, by the life they had created from nothing but faith and determination. And Jacob Morrison had not been just a cowboy who had hidden a fugitive. He had been a man who had seen someone in need and had made the choice to protect her, to love her, to build a life with her that would echo through the ages. Their story was one of redemption and love, of second chances and new beginnings. It was a story of the American West, of brave men and women who had carved lives out of harsh desert land, who had faced danger and hardship with courage and determination. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple, about two people who had found each other when they needed each other most, and had created something beautiful from the ashes of despair. As the years rolled on and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the Morrison Ranch continued to stand as a monument to that love. New generations worked the land, honored the legacy, and told the story of their ancestors who had started it all. Technology changed, the world evolved, but the core values that Jacob and Nora had instilled in their family remained constant. Honesty, hard work, loyalty, and above all, love. And on warm spring evenings, when the desert bloomed with unexpected color and the air smelled of sage and possibility, the Morrison family still gathered on that old porch to watch the sunset, to remember where they came from, and to honor the love story that had made it all possible. They raised their glasses to the memory of Jacob and Nora, to the mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but a carpet bag and a price on her head, and to the cowboy who had looked at her and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You are mine to protect." Those words had been the foundation of everything that followed, the bedrock upon which a family and a legacy had been built. They represented a commitment that went beyond mere protection, beyond simple safety. They represented a love so profound that it transcended time and circumstance, a love that had started with letters and grown into something that would last for generations. The story of Jacob and Nora Morrison was complete, their lives lived fully, and their love documented in letters, memories, and the faces of countless descendants who carried their DNA and their values forward into the future. It was a story with a happy ending, with love conquering fear, with family triumphing over adversity, with two hearts finding their home in each other and building something that would last forever. They had lived. They had loved. They had created a legacy. And in the end, that was everything.